go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. I'm Margaret Lynn, Director of Clinical Research Development at the Tennessee Clinical and Translational Science Institute at UTHSC. And I, along with Dorita Brand, the Tennessee Clinical and Translational Science Institute Director of Administration, want to welcome you to Research 101. The goal of this six-part series is to provide advanced information for research study conduct. Research 103 follows Research 101 and Research 102, which was offered in the spring and fall of 2020. And if you weren't able to attend those sessions, those recordings are available on our website, and you can go to the search engine of the homepage at UTHSC and enter either Research 101 or Research 102 to find them. And you can always email me at M as in Margaret, Lynn, Lynn, at uthsc.edu. So we're recording Research 101, and hopefully we'll have that available to others on our website soon. I want to thank UTHSC Information Technology Department for all their help with this series. During this Zoom lecture, your microphone has been muted, but you may use the question and answer function to ask questions, and those will be asked at the end of the session. Because we're recording and doing these sessions from our homes, there's always the possibility of technical difficulty. And if we can't resolve it quickly, then the session will be posted on our website and you will be notified of that availability. So just please bear with us. You will receive an evaluation of this session by email. And after you complete that evaluation, you'll receive or be able to download and print your certificate of attendance. So be looking for that evaluation within 10 business days. And if you don't get it after 10 business days, you can email me. Dorita Brand and I have no real or apparent financial disclosures. And then now for the good part. Today's session is how to develop PowerPoint presentations and other effective communication tools. And our speaker is Sally Badoud. Sally has a bachelor's degree in art with a concentration in graphic design and an MBA from the University of Alabama in Huntsville. She worked in a marketing firm for the first 9 years of her career as a graphic designer, art director, and creative director. She has been working in higher ed for the last 11 years in marketing for professional and continuing studies, marketing for student recruitment, and a year and a half as the interim director of admissions at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. Then the last 4.5 years in her current role as Associate Vice Chancellor of Communications and Marketing at UTHSC. And we're so lucky to have her. And Sally, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I'm excited to be here, and I hope that I am going to address everything that you guys need to know about PowerPoint and communication tools. And if I have missed anything, please feel free at any point to shoot me an email and ask whatever question, no matter how big or small it is, and I will try to get you taken care of. Oops, I cannot. Oh, there we go. Learning objectives. So from this presentation, the first thing that you should be able to do is to demonstrate how to build an effective presentation using Microsoft PowerPoint. And the second learning objective is to identify additional communication tools and understand what makes them effective. And there will be a heavy emphasis on the first point as opposed to the second. So we're going to start off building an effective presentation in PowerPoint. So I wanted to really have this be an informal conversation about this as well, because I think one of the biggest problems with PowerPoints are they can just turn into a giant snooze fest, and you just want to go to sleep watching them or listening to them. So I'm, trying to be a little more conversational about this. But when you get started on a PowerPoint, you really have to have a game plan. You want to think about what you're doing first before you just start putting slide after slide together. And the very first thing as a marketer myself, and a heavy emphasis on branding in my office, is to make sure you have a branded template. So, that can be a general template that your company has put together, or it can be something as detailed as one that's specifically made for like your unit, if you're, in a college or your department or something like that. So either one of those is definitely fine. I think the more you hone in onto what your specific area is, just the more it seems like, wow, this presentation was put together for the intended audience, and it just seems a little more special. You can always reach out to your communications and marketing team if you have any questions of how to obtain a branded template. I think for the most part, most offices do have some sort of a template that they can give you. And I will say, if you work for the University of Tennessee Health Science Center, we literally just updated these this week. So we have fresh new templates on our branding site. And at the end of the presentation, there is a link that will take you there that you can download these for your own use. And when you see the templates, it's just that. It's there waiting for you to click on these boxes and add the information yourself. So that's what you'll see when you download our templates also. So step one, outside, of course, of making sure you have a branded template, is to think about your presentation, right? There's a lot of things to consider. What presentation style is going to work best for your audience? Is this something that's, more technical or more playful? Are you going to be lecturing to someone and making sure you go step by step and here's what you have to do? Or is this something that could be more vibrant? A lot of photos, maybe graphs, diagrams, charts, anything like that, just to add some visualness to it. Is this going to be more instructional, or is it going to be conversational? Are you talking to the audience? Are you, this is a time to also consider, is there a Q&A part at the end? Are you going to allow comments during it? And of course, we've also got to think of non-virtual presentations as well, right? Will you stop your presentation and allow people to ask questions in the middle? That kind of forms how you think about your presentation and how you start to build your presentation. And then, of course, what are the goals and learning objectives that you want to accomplish? What's the outcome? What do you want this presentation to do for your audience? When they walk away from this or sign out of that Zoom, what will they have learned from going through this? So, step two, develop your talking points. This is really like the meat of the presentation. What do you want to talk about? I think it's more helpful for me if I put pen to paper and think it through, right? What do I want to cover? What's the high points? What's the main points that I want to make sure the audience comes away with? And then you start to shape your introduction, your body, which is the meat, and then the conclusion of how you're going to wrap it up. What do you want to make sure you add in that presentation? I'm sure there's some things that probably stick out and you're like, oh, I cannot forget to include this point. So make sure you write that down. What are some required details that you have to include? So for example, we, went through, learning objectives. That was an important part that had to be included. Disclosures and that kind of stuff, all that stuff that you have to check that box. Make sure you don't forget about that. Make sure you don't forget about logos. Make sure you don't forget to come up with a really captivating title for your presentation. All of these things, just kind of think them through. And then once you've got the talking points, then you start thinking about the visual piece. What can you show in your presentation that will help illustrate what it is you're talking about? And then once you kind of have a game plan, you can move forward to the actual creation of the PowerPoint. And so I always recommend that people start with the cover slide, because just as you logged on to this Zoom today, we hadn't started yet, but there was the cover page up, waiting and ready. So I really think it's important to put some thought into the cover, not only to the title that, the presentation is, but the visual graphics that are around it, the logo that is used. Make sure that it's branded properly, that it's using the colors of your institution or your company, that it says everything it needs to say, and that honestly, it's just a visually appealing slide that can hang out for a while introductions are being done and all of that. And then when you move on from that, that's when you get into the good part, right? That's when you start inserting the content, your images, your charts, and all of that kind of stuff. And after I get through this PowerPoint, I can actually get into the nitty gritty of some of that, if that's what you guys want to see, where we kind of get into the application itself. So you're going to want to think through your images, think through your charts ahead of time, to where when you build the PowerPoint, you're really just dropping them in. I find it's the most time consuming when you go out looking for all the content that you're going to put in there, especially the visual parts. So you want to make sure if you're including a graph or a chart or a table of some sort, that it's been updated, right? That it's got the information that your audience is looking for. So that's, account for that time. Photos. You want to make sure that you're using photos that are crisp and new and interesting. Something that people want to see. I would, and you'll see this later on in the presentation too, I'm very much against clip art and stock photography. I think that audiences see through that a mile away. And I think that they just don't feel that personal connection if you're using some kind of generic imagery. So that's one of my top tips, is to make sure that, if at all possible, that you're going out there and you're getting some authentic imagery for your presentation. So you can see over here to the right some examples that we have. The top one is actually a break in a presentation, and how we had historically been doing this. It's just a plain green background with a text that basically says, okay, you're going to this next section. And so what we did for the Chancellor's State of the University PowerPoint is add in a photo, make it interesting, so that when you do linger on these quote unquote boring slides that just kind of help you with the transition through the PowerPoint, that there's something interesting for your audience to look at. And then I think it's also important, once you get through, the presentation itself and you're wrapping it up, I think it's really important that you have that ending slide. A lot of people tend to just put questions, question mark on the end, which will definitely prompt the audience to say, okay, here's the time where you can ask the questions. And if you don't want to open it up to an audience, let's say it's a lecture where you're not going to have any feedback from the audience, you can certainly put any resources there, contact information, or honestly, you can just end with the logo centered very simply on the back. It's just a nice, clean way to kind of wrap it up all together. So this is a very important section. I've got PowerPoint do's followed by PowerPoint don'ts. And I think if there's anything that you learn from this presentation, it's the do's and the don'ts of how to build a presentation. Number one, be brief and to the point. This is not the time to copy paragraphs and paragraphs of content into your presentation. I think we've all been there where we've seen those presentations where you find yourself starting to read and then you just get lost. It's just so much copy. And then what happens when you put a lot of copy into your PowerPoint? The fonts just start getting smaller and smaller and smaller because the PowerPoint wants to include everything that you want it to. But we have to say, no, that's too much. You either need to break it up and have more slides that have fewer words on it. But really, the second bullet point is what I think is the most important. Use the phrases and not sentences. So I've got a couple of examples over to the right from a previous, is actually from my Research 102 PowerPoint, talking about audience and messaging and all of that. It's very simple. The visual piece of it takes up over half. Then you can very clearly see, right, the top one, who is your audience? And then there's some phrases below and items below that don't make it feel like, okay, I've got to read this whole paragraph to understand what's going on. And I think the other thing for a presenter, if you're the one that's going to be presenting this PowerPoint also, you don't want to get in a situation where you find yourself reading from the PowerPoint. I think that is a snooze fest number one, right? The minute that the audience feels like you're just reading very, monotone, going over, here's what it is, and then bullet point 2 says this, and blah, 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 you've lost them. So keep it to the phrases. That forces the presenter to be able to talk about it naturally and explain whatever needs to be explained. And then that kind of leads into white space. White space is good. And what I mean by white space is this area on the PowerPoint slide where there isn't anything. It's not wall-to-wall text. There's some breathing room. You might only have like this slide that we're looking at right now, right? There's 4 short bullets on it and then nothing below. That's okay. You actually want that. You don't want to say, oh, wow, I could fit at least 4 more bullets on here. Let me add 4 more things. Nope, because the minute you do that, it's just too much for your audience to remember. It makes it harder for them to follow along. So So white space is good. And then another point is to keep your font size consistent. So what I'm talking about, and then again, I'm going to refer to the 2 over to the right-hand side, the size of the text is consistent on both of these slides. So you don't have a situation where some of the words on the top slide are bigger than the words on the bottom slide in the sense of like the same placement, and they're supposed to achieve the same thing. Keep it very consistent. And it's a little tricky with PowerPoint sometimes. You'll find yourself, typing away, and then all of a sudden PowerPoint has shrunk down your font size because it knows you have all these extra words. But that's where it's really on us to look at it and say, oh no, wait a minute. This slide has a whole lot more words than the following slide or the preceding slide. I should probably take some of that out. Let me either edit my phrases, let me create a second slide, let me do something. And then you find yourself, or at least this is how I operate, I go back and forth and make sure that I'm clicking on my text and just making sure that the font size is exactly the same from slide to slide. So that way it just gives this sense of, like a cohesive message. There's nothing weird on slide 4 when it jumps up 5-point sizes, or on slide 8 it gets itty bitty and it's hard to read it. Just make it consistent the whole way through. And then I want to talk about graphs and tables a little bit too. So in the majority probably of the PowerPoint slides that I've put together for clients or been witness to as a participant in some sort of a presentation, there's usually some graphs involved, and is incredibly hard to view the small text on those. And I get it, right? These were probably created in Excel or some other program that exported in, saved as a JPEG, and slapped on the middle of the screen. So I would say, this is the time where you want to use a template that has the most breathing room, right? It has the most blank space in the middle so that you can take your graph and make it as big as it possibly can. So here's 2 examples on the right of a presentation that I put together for our chancellor. And it kind of follows with what we were just talking about on the previous slide, where you've got fonts that are consistent. You've got fonts that it's a whole matchy look, if you will. There's a consistent border on the bottom. There's a consistent subject line. There's a consistent color being used. Now, you can see from the top to the bottom, not all graphs are going to have the same items. Not all graphs are going to have 3 different elements that we're evaluating, but you still want them to look as similar as you can as you're going through. That just really helps with the professional look of this presentation. So, spend a little extra time when you have the graphs in Excel, for example, to, make sure that the color palettes being used are consistent, to make sure the fonts being used are consistent, to make sure that overall appearance is very consistent. So then when you take those graphs, charts, tables, whatever it is, out of that program and you drop them into PowerPoint, you've then got this really nice cohesive look that is just very pleasing for the audience to see. And then I also want you to be consistent in looking at how the margins look. Do you have an image, a chart, or something like that that's maybe too far over to the left or too far over to the right? I would suggest always trying to center these items so that they're just dead center. And that way, as you flip from slide to slide, there is this continuity in the actual placement, and that the graphs aren't going off of the edge. I think that's something to be very concerned about too, because, you build this on your computer screen and you can see everything. But when you take this to a presentation, your, screen or whatever it is that's projecting your PowerPoint, it might be off a little bit. And so you want to make sure that you've got that wiggle room on the margins where your content isn't going right there and potentially could be cut off. PowerPoint don'ts. This is probably my favorite part. I see this often. And I will say, as a disclaimer, I have pulled these samples from the internet. I did not want to use any samples that I have personally received, just in case somebody's on this call. But you've got a couple of examples over here on the right. And I think the most important thing, well, I'm going to say that about everything. They're all important. Avoid too much text. We already mentioned this. So this first top example, that's way too much. You can't glance at this and see what the high points are. You actually have to start going through sentence by sentence. I mean, there are multiple sentences in each bullet. I don't even think one sentence should be in a bullet. Try to limit yourself to phrases. That way, when someone is just kind of glancing over it and you really have just a few seconds that you can make this good impression, that you can, capture their attention and that they will retain what you're trying to say. So I would say, cut this text down drastically. And also limit the amount of bullets that you have. You don't want to have so many bullets that it's just bullet, 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 bullet. And then what if there's 2 columns of bullets, right? That's a lot too. So be very mindful of how many bullet points that you have on a slide. Don't use charts, graphs, and I should probably add photos on here too, that are poor resolution. It's very important from a design standpoint that any elements that you bring into a PowerPoint are clear and crisp and easy to read. Nothing is worse than seeing an image put or a photo put down that is very fuzzy around the edges. And I will also, I feel like I need to mention this too. If you have a low resolution image of some sort, usually they're the ones that you've taken from online, and you slap them on here and then you scale it up. Those images are made of dots. And so what happens there are these limited number of dots just start pulling farther away from each other. And that's what makes it look so blurry. The rule of thumb in any design, and especially on PowerPoint too, is that you want to always size down. You never want to size up. So if you get a photo from, let's say, your communications and marketing office to use on a PowerPoint, they are probably going to give you a pretty large file once you copy it into PowerPoint. And you might say, oh, that thing's huge. And then you have to, drag the corner, drag it all the way down to a usable size. That's great. That's perfect. That's what we're looking for. What we're not looking for is you copy an image into the PowerPoint. It's this little bitty thing in the center. And you think, oh, I actually need to make this bigger. I have half a slide I need to cover. And then you scale that sucker up, and then all of a sudden you have this very blurry image that you can't read. And it's one thing to do that for a photo. It's a very different thing to do that for a graph, where you actually have to read the text that has been put in place, or markers on bullet points where they're, on a chart of some sort, and you can't read them. So I would say, please don't ever, ever, ever use any charts, graphs, photos, any kind of visual that is not high resolution. Also, do not use fonts or colors that are hard to read. And you can see that on the bottom example on this page. That green and red vibrates so much, but especially that, I think it's a yellowish orangish color on top of that lime green. It is hard to read. It's very hard. So be very mindful. I personally like a plain white background with a good darker font on top that has some contrast. Now, I do use the orange in a lot of our stuff because we're UT, and I think that just goes with the branding, but I try to limit my orange use to a very, very limited amount of it. The meat of it, what I really want people to remember, that's in the dark green, which is also a branded color, but you could do a black, you could do, I actually really like a dark gray color. Sometimes the black and white can be very contrasty. I think a dark gray is a little easier on the eyes. Same is true in print too, FYI. And then also don't use too many colors. When you start throwing colors in, let's say, you have the header is a color, and then you have the logo is a different color in the header, and then you've got a headline color. And let's say we took these 4 bullets and we want to make it fun, and we put each bullet as a different color. It's just too much. It's way too much. It's confusing to the reader. They're not sure what they're supposed to focus in on. It's distracting to the presenter. They probably will lose their place as well. It's just not a very professional look. And then I've got one more slide of don'ts. I want to warn people about using uncommon fonts that will eventually substitute out when you move that presentation to a different computer. And this happens less when we're virtual and we're all, presenting on our own laptop or desktop computer. But when we go back to presenting in person and you put your presentation on a thumb drive or whatever, or, maybe you save it to your OneDrive, and then you go to a different computer and it gets pulled up. If that second computer that you're unfamiliar with does not have these specialty fonts loaded onto it, your presentation is going to be kind of changed. It will default to whatever the fonts are on that computer that will work. And I've seen this happen, and it's heartbreaking every time it happens, because you've got this well thought out design and you've used these very cool fonts. And then all of a sudden it's something like Arial. It looks terrible. And then maybe Arial is bigger or smaller than what you were intending it for. And then you've got these weird breaks. So then when you've got the weird breaks on the font part, on the text part of it, then you've got these weirder spaces that are formed with any imagery or graphs or anything like that. So I would definitely advise everyone to use a very common font like Arial or Helvetica as you build these. I am personally also, as you know, very anti-clip art or too many images, as you can see by this example on the bottom. I don't even know where to start looking on this one. There's so much going on. I can't rationalize the logic on it. And then you've got this font that's weird, that's going off of the yellow area into this darker area. It's just very hard to read it. And then again, the clip art part, it's just not personal, right? It doesn't feel like someone took the time to really get you that presentation that is specific to your needs as an audience. And please don't ever use Comic Sans. I hate Comic Sans with a passion. And I know hate is a strong word and you shouldn't use hate, but I hate Comic Sans. It's so terrible. And I feel like as a professional, no. And I have this meme up that was on our office's refrigerator that said, we're a Fortune 500 company, not a lemonade stand. Do not use Comic Sans. And it's so funny, but it's true. I think unless you're teaching kindergarten, that's probably the only time that it's acceptable for you to use Comic Sans in a PowerPoint. Get down off my soapbox now. So that's PowerPoint in a nutshell. I've got some other examples that I can stop sharing this later and show you some examples that I've done, but it's a lot of the tools are very similar when you're going through and you're building them. So I want to take a minute too to talk about these other effective communication tools. And the highlight again is the PowerPoint piece of this, but I think this all plays in together. And as we're talking about how do we communicate with audiences, how do we make sure that we're building these communication tools that, reflect our messaging and, say what we need to say in a very effective manner, right? Quickly, few words, high visual impact. So on this slide, I've listed some internal communication tools. And these are some very common tools across any company or institution. Email, usually the number one, right? That's what gets dumped directly onto your computer screen every single day. It can be targeted to whoever you need it to be targeted to. It's a super important communication tool. The website or an intranet site, also very important. Signs, that covers posters that might be printed and installed into a frame, for a heavily traveled area within a building. Digital boards, we utilize these on our campus a lot. It's messages that scroll by very quickly, about 10 seconds, 8 to 10 seconds each. They're up for usually, again, by areas that are going to see more traffic. So we have them in the food court areas, by elevators, in main lobbies. Retractable banner stands. I actually love these. These things are usually about $200, $250. It's about an 80-inch banner that you pull out from a base. When you're finished using it, you just slide it back into the base and you can take it wherever you need to. It has a nice big impact. They're great for trade shows. They're also great for lobbies to get your messages across. And they're temporary, right? You can put them up when you need them, but it's not a permanent sign that you have to, deal with actual building something. And then banners, right? These are your run-of-the-mill, put a grommet on the corner, string them up, whether it's outside, whether it's inside over a stairwell, anything like that. They're very, very handy communication tools. And then, of course, your run-of-the-mill flyer. I would say, we see a lot of people in our office that come to us and they want flyers done, and flyers are very tricky. So if you just have a bunch of papers, printed, and then you want to hand them out, people are going to look at them for a second, and then they're going to throw them hopefully into the trash can or the recycle bin. What also happens is they never make it that far, and it just ends up being trash on tables or stools or something like that. My suggestion is, if a flyer is needed, think about amping it up a little bit and putting it in like those nice plexiglass frames that you can get from Office Depot or Staples. They just make it look so much nicer. It looks like it has a place. It wasn't forgotten. It's intentional. And they have them in different sizes. I know our office has 8x10 plexi signs. We also have 5x7s. It's really about how intrusive do you want to be when it comes to getting your message out there. And I'll also say, and this comes from our campus as well, be very mindful when you go to post a flyer. I know for our campus at the Health Science Center, we don't allow people to tape up flyers on the campus. It ends up looking very cluttered. There's no one that comes around after the fact and takes the signs down. So then you end up having these taped up messages that maybe were 6 months ago, or maybe even last week or yesterday. That reflects poorly on the overall professionalism of the institution if you've got all these out-of-date signs up. Besides that, the method for taping up is kind of crazy. I know on our own campus, I've taken signs that have been put up with painter's tape down, and not the painter's tape where you roll it nice and cute and put it on the back where you never see the tape, like taped way all over the place, and lime green and blue painter's tape. I've pulled packing tape off of freshly painted walls where it gives me some sort of heartburn as I figure out how much paint I'm about to take off of the wall with me. And then my favorite right now is as we have so many buildings that have been closed, main entrances because of COVID screenings, right? We funnel them through certain doors so they can have their temperature taken. Those other doors have these notes all over them for FedEx, drop off a package here. Hey, if you want to schedule this, go to this website. Hey, do this, do this, do this. And so then when you walk up to this door, you don't even know what to look at because there's just flyers everywhere. So I think internal communication is really important, but I think it's very, very crucial that we have a plan and we brand them appropriately, and that we take the time to make our communication look professional. So I've got this graphic over on the right-hand side of the screen. That is, we had a coronavirus symposium on our campus in April of 2020, not too long after the pandemic started. And it was a very big event for us to market. We had this look and feel, and we use this color red on everything. We use it on our website. We use it on our emails. We use it on flyers. When we had the actual symposium itself was held, that was the style of the PowerPoint that was created to kind of go through everything. So it's very important that you take the time and you brand it, not only with your institution's branding or, your company that you work for, but you also brand it in the essence of what that event is. So in this case, the CDC's graphic of the coronavirus, the red, the font, the gray background, it was all very, very cohesive if you were to put all of the marketing materials together. And then external communication tools. I don't know if you noticed, but the tools for internal and external are basically the same. So I thought this was really important to show you all this, that it really comes down to how you use these tools and how you brand them and placement and all that kind of stuff, because at the core, those communication tools are the same. That's where it comes very important of you to think about your audience, what you're trying to project, what's the takeaway point, what do you want that audience member to do? So if it's internal, you want your colleagues to act a certain way. If it's external, you want people you've never even interacted with or talked to act a certain way. So we do that and maintain this professionalism and maintain this branded look by utilizing the same look and feel, fonts and colors, images and all of that consistently from start to finish, so that if you saw a couple of elements on week 1 and then on week 2, oh, here's this flyer, for example, that I have pulled to the side, instantly, oh, UTHSC is doing something with this. Yep, I recognize the graphic, the color, the overall look and feel. It's very consistent. So I really wanted to take some time today, after talking about the PowerPoints, to really point out that, the tools are there, whether you're internally communicating or externally communicating. It's about how you use them. It's about where you place them. It's about the frequency. And, one thing that was not put on here, social media, right? That's very important too. That is more of an external communication tool than an internal. However, we do at the university, we do a lot of internal communication on social media by utilizing the story feature on Instagram and Facebook. That way you have your people who see it every day. They're the ones who are going to be going through those stories that are only up for 24 hours, not the people who 6 months from now might want to check out the university and, oh, I'm interested in, nursing school. I'm not really sure what's going on there. Let me see what my feel is from their Instagram page. And then, you go through and you see all these beautiful pictures and fun times and all of that. So it's important on how you tie all this together. Oops. And I think I just said a bunch of this already. Same tools, different audience, right? So keep the audience in mind, make it clean. And this is also applicable for the PowerPoint piece too, right? Keep it clean, professional, white space. We want some breathing room in there. We just don't want to see text, photograph, another photo on top of each other. Spread it out, make it count. Lengthy text, right? Brief phrases. That's what we're going for. And not too many bullet points. Let your audience digest it before you move on to that next slide and have more to talk about. Support your messaging with appropriate visuals. That can be photos, charts, graphs, tables. It can be anything that you need to convey your message to your audience. And then coordinate messaging, branding, and style across the channels. Be matchy-matchy. So when I was talking about the coronavirus piece, that's very matchy-matchy. Same image, resized different ways to appear in different mediums, right? You've got social media and website, you've got the emails that have gone out, you've got the same look and feel in the PowerPoint presentation for the actual symposium, flyers, banners, everything. It feels the same. It's very matchy-matchy. And then I have our resources here that I think will be helpful, especially, I'm sorry for you that are not on the UTHSC campus or a part of the institution. This is very much directed to our internal folks, but we have a branding website that has logos that you can download. We have a logo usage guide as well. So when we talk about the white space, we really have some rules in place of how much room on either side of logos that you should not place an image or other text to give it that white space. And as of this week, we have some fresh new PowerPoint templates that you can download. We're pretty pumped about those. And then, at the end of all of this, if you still need some help, let's say you need a custom PowerPoint template made, and before you all think like, oh yes, I'm going to get a custom power, that really just means like your personal logo is on there for your unit. It's not too crazy. You can reach out to us. We can absolutely do that for you. We've done that for several people already and be happy to help you in any way we can. And so that is it for my presentation on the PowerPoint. I am more than happy to get down into some PowerPoint if there's specific questions on how to use a template or anything like that. But I guess I was going to see if there were any questions first to figure out.
There are, Sally. This is Margaret. First question is, what are your thoughts on using animation in a PowerPoint?
Oh, so that's so funny. The meeting before this, I was talking to my counterpart at the UT system, and I told her, I said, when this is over, I'm doing a presentation on PowerPoints. And she said, oh, I hope you include that animation should not be included. I don't know how often I have to tell people that. So that is so funny to have that question. So I personally am not an animation fan. I don't know if y'all remember, it's not PowerPoint. It's on the tip of my tongue. I can't remember it, but it's where you would see the animation go from slide to slide, and you could have this PowerPoint and you go down into this little rabbit hole and it twists and it turns. And I feel like, I needed to take some motion sickness medicine to get through the PowerPoint. So I'm personally not a motion fan. I think it's distracting. I think if done well, it could provide some value, but I think 9 times out of 10, it's not done well. And it is confusing to the audience. It also is one more thing that could go wrong during a presentation. So that makes me nervous too. I think that in the world of technology, right, you want it to go as easy as possible. So if you have animation in the middle of it, and for some reason it doesn't load, oh man, you've lost the time that you've put into it. You've lost the effort, and then it looks weird. Then you have to explain, oh, I'm sorry, there was supposed to be this thing that did this and it didn't work. And so my rule of thumb is to not, but that's not everybody's.
That's a good opinion though. Second question is, what about using Times font? And then do you have a font preference?
So I don't love Times. I am quite the font snob. So I don't know that maybe I shouldn't talk about this so much. I don't like Times and some of the other serif fonts. And what I mean by a serif font is when you have the little hangy thing off of the ends of it. So like Times and Times New Roman, those are serif fonts. For me, it's the numbers. If you write a phone number or something, you have certain numbers that drop down below the baseline. And that, as a designer, drives me crazy. I think all numbers and letters should line up very evenly at the baseline and at the top too. So for me, I don't use Times and Times New Roman because of how the numbers can be a little weird. My recommendation is Arial or Helvetica. But I also like a very clean sans serif font, which means there's no hanging things off the top. So our font of choice at the university for all materials is Gotham. Gotham is one, it's a font you have to pay for. It's not one of these more common free fonts. So we actually have it in our branding guidelines that for digital materials such as a PowerPoint, a Word document, Excel, anything like that, that Arial is the font of choice for those applications.
Okay, next question. I think you briefly touched upon this, but everybody's going virtual. So are there any distinctions that you need to prepare for when you're making a virtual PowerPoint versus a live presentation?
Not really. I don't think, in some ways a virtual one is safer and I touched on this, that you don't run that risk of having your presentation run on a device that's unfamiliar to you and the font substituting out or something like that. Um, for me, it can get tricky if you wanted to have some visuals or if you wanted to have the interaction with the audience. So I'm a people person. I like talking to an audience. I also like to read the audience to see like, oh, are they falling asleep? Are they looking at their phones? Have I lost them? I can't see that here. I mean, I hope everyone is sitting on the edge of their seat, just enthralled with what I have to say, but I really can't tell because I'm looking at my own presentation and there's not this sea of people that I can kind of gauge. I also feel like when you do a presentation in person, you read the head nods more so than anything. So if you're hitting on something that's hitting home, or someone had a puzzled look on their face, and then you start talking about a topic and you can see like, oh, you can almost see that light bulb go off. You want to keep expanding on that, and virtually you can't. So it's tricky in that regard. So I would say, just put your best foot forward in terms of a solid presentation, and make sure you open it up on the end for questions, because there's probably something huge that I have missed, in this presentation. And this way the audience can circle back to me and be like, wait, what about this giant thing you forgot? Or, there's a lot of people who are very introverted who don't want to either talk at an in-person seminar or even on Zoom. They may not feel comfortable typing a question in for everyone to see. So I think it's important also to have that follow-up information available. So after the presentation, someone can absolutely go to you one-on-one and say, hey, can you explain this to me? Can you share your slides? Can you share this graphic? What did you mean when you said X, Y, and Z? I think that's important.
Okay, next question is, many PowerPoints are posted to use as a learning tool. So how do you get by with using a phrase when it may not convey a complete thought and could be misinterpreted?
Yeah, so that's tricky. And you have to make that call. I think, using phrases, that's a best practice in terms of, if you're presenting to a captive audience, it's just a best practice. If there is some important information that you have to get out there, then you really do have to, put that on your slide. And maybe you change it, right? Maybe it's not part of one bullet. Maybe it's a dedicated slide by itself. Maybe you treat the text a little bit differently, pair it with a nice image that helps reflect that. I think that's a way that you could absolutely do it. I think you just have to, take the best practice suggestions, but apply them to what actually is going to work for you. I think the same thing can be said for graphs. Sometimes there's graphs that are just too crazy, huge, and detailed that you can't not include it, but you also can't simplify it at all. So you just do the best you can. In those scenarios, I would probably take the formatting completely off of the slide so that you have it the most canvas space to work with, and then stretch it as much as you can. And then that's up to the presenter to then kind of explain, here's this, blah, 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 blah. Your audience, if you're consistent in your branding on each slide, they're not going to miss that one slide doesn't have a footer on it or a logo at the top or anything. You can totally get away with that.
Okay, I think the last question is, we're all guilty of coming to the designer and saying, I'll know it when I see it. So how can we best convey or communicate with our marketing and communications department or a graphic designer?
Yeah. Oh gosh, we hear that all the time. And I think it's our job as the communications and marketing office to put forth some tools that serve as a good starting point for non-graphic designers and non-communicators to use. So for example, these PowerPoint templates, they have some options without too many options that you can go in and that you can utilize. I think it's also important to answer that specific question. I think it's important to have a conversation with your communications and marketing person about what the outcome is, because what we see happen is someone will get it in their mind, oh, I got to have a flyer for this. Oh, I've got to have a this for that. And then our team will start work. Okay, here's the flyer that you requested. Then towards the end of the project, we will somehow get more information about what the flyer is for, this, that, and the other. And it's like this light bulb goes off on our side and we're like, oh, well, if you're going to do that, I wouldn't recommend a flyer. I would recommend a retractable banner stand, or I would recommend a website. And then you push people to the website via a postcard or something. So I think it's always good to kind of explain, and you can do it in an email as well, give some background of what you're going to use the piece for. And that way our team has that extra information that we can then do a quick assessment of like, oh, maybe not a flyer, maybe this thing instead. I think that would be good.
I've thoroughly enjoyed this presentation. I know everyone has. Dorita, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hey, Sally, I think someone was asking about if you had some more examples of some slides. Do you want to try to share those?
Yeah,
or?
Yeah, absolutely. I am, give me just a second. So this is the Chancellor State of the University PowerPoint. I hope I'm not ruining his secrets by saying that I put his presentation together and he did not put this together himself, but oops. So this is something that I do every year, State of the University. And so this last one was pretty exciting to be able to change it up. I think I mentioned some examples, but even from the cover page, I veered from the typical green background with the logo in the center and all of that to showcase something that's just a little more attractive. And this is our slightly older PowerPoint template as well, but so you can see how that varies just a little bit. But I'm just going to kind of click through some of this. But for me, the visual part is really important. Oh, this is a perfect time to show this slide, actually. So this was our strategic map. That's a pretty huge document, but it's also gridded out so that you can't chop it in half and see what the bottom half means if you don't have the columns at the top. So this is a situation where I removed all the branding and just made it as wide as I possibly and as tall as I possibly could to show that for the audience. And again, you're not intending the audience to read all of this, but just to say, hey, in a nutshell, this is our strategic plan. It's pretty massive. Keep your photos simple, keep your bullets very simple. And then here's where I stole this from earlier, where, as you go from section to section, jazz it up a little bit if you can, just to really help convey what you're trying to talk about. So again, I like the spread too, right? And obviously, I always try to be very diverse when you're showing people. It's just necessary. And I think sometimes on the Health Science Center campus, it's hard, right? If, you just can't make people magically appear. But, I would definitely make sure that as you work through a PowerPoint or any kind of presentation piece, that you keep that in mind. It's very, very important. Probably too many bullet points on this one. I'm a work in progress as well. Here's another one of these slide separators, if you will, where you just, you change from topic to topic. Again, big photos, just a few bullets, because that's what people, when they're listening to a presentation, they want to look at the photos. They want to look at what's interesting. They're less concerned about the text that's being said because they're hearing it at the same time, but they want to see really nice looking photos. So finances, there are no pictures that convey finances. And I am not about to put a dancing dollar bill on any kind of a presentation. So then you have stuff like this that you utilize. I hope this is answering or showing what.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Too many bullets on this one too. Yeah.
this is Dorita. I really do like the idea of like the bigger picture and keeping the bullets more simple. I think sometimes we all try to not have that white space that you've been talking about. I know I do in some of my presentations. So thank you so much for your presentation today. You've given all of us a lot of useful information that I know we can use and develop in PowerPoints in the future. And I personally know that I'm going to use some of your suggestions of do's and don'ts to hopefully develop better PowerPoints in the future, since that's part of mine and Margaret's position here at UT. We do a lot of PowerPoints, so hopefully I can make mine better from some of the suggestions you've given us. So thank you so much. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Margaret, are there any other questions before I close?
I think that's it.
Okay. Our next presentation will be this Thursday, the 8th at 11:30 a.m. And Sarah White, our Associate Vice Chancellor for Research at UTHSC, will be presenting on research contracts and agreements. And we hope you can join us. And thank you again for attending our first session of Research 103. We again want to thank Sally for all the good information, and everyone have a great rest of your day. Thank you.